Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. Wherever you are in this world, welcome to today's webinar on improving customer service experiences in EV charging, where we will hear from industry experts on their experience, their best practices, and opinions on how to do this. Hi, I'm Daniel Hong. I'm the Chief Marketing Officer at Minerva CQ. We are the only company that has an AI co-pilot built for customer support specifically for eMobility. I'm excited to be your moderator and guide today as I'm joined by two industry rock stars. Chris Kluzak, the former head of customer care for NL in North America. NL is one of the largest energy companies in the world. And Chris led the global customer support team for NL's EV charging division called NLX Way. We also have Rod McLean, an industry expert in IoT connectivity, mobile networks, and the contact center. He's a seasoned marketing exec who served at Inseego Corp, Peloton Technologies, that's Peloton with an O, Isla Networks, and Genesis. And Rod is also one of Minerva CQ's advisors. There's a bit more as to why we have these two speakers on the webinar today. They both sit at very interesting intersections. Chris is known as the unicorn in eMobility customer support. And why? Chris has a unique background. She's an EV owner, she's an electrician, and she's a customer support leader and specialist. And this provides that proverbial rare customer-centric perspective to all stakeholders in an eMobility company. I actually rely on her for a lot of perspectives on the eMobility space, and she always takes complex stuff and then simplifies it. So I love that about her. Thank you for joining us, Chris.
Thanks, Daniel.
And we have Rod McLean. So Rod, and you see him, the Peloton truck, he's also a race car driver. So he knows anything and everything about how automobiles work, from both the gasoline powered cars to electric vehicles. Both of these individuals have combined their passions outside of work and brought them into work. And really, there's a huge 1 + 1 = 3 effect. Thank you both for just coming on this webinar today and being able to share some great perspectives. To set the stage, what is going on today, right? There's seems to be a backlash against electric vehicles. So Tesla and Ford, they're slashing their prices. I just read that Ford, General Motors, Mercedes-Benz, Volkswagen, Jaguar, Land Rover, and Aston Martin are scaling back, or they're delaying their electric vehicle plans. There's more emphasis and talks about bringing back plug-in hybrids. The EPA is considering slowing down requirements to sell more EVs. It kind of paints kind of a gray picture as to where we stand in terms of the EV industry overall. Do any of you guys have perspectives that you want to share on this, the FUD that's going around on EV space?
Yeah, I do. I think it's kind of an odd situation because the backlash against electric vehicles seems to be more driven by the public charging aspects and not necessarily how to use them or how they perform. You know, when you think about it, people are used to going to a gas station to fuel their car, or a racetrack to fuel your car, wherever you are, right? When you realize that you can put that fuel into your car at home, it changes how you do things and how you plan travel. So you don't have to go, we're leaving on a trip, we have to hit the gas station, get our food and snacks, and then go. If you're charged at home when you leave, you can get in your car and you can go right away and get your stuff along the way. You don't have to do that trip. So public charging, though, has been very slow to roll out. And when you think about it, public charging wouldn't even be where it is today if it weren't for Dieselgate with VW or Enron, because Enron was forced to put in a bunch of EV Go stations in California to start, and then some on the East Coast. And then VW was forced to go and put in a network. So they worked with Electrify America. And that's where a lot of the charging stations you see now are for non-Tesla, non-Rivian vehicles. On the other hand, Tesla Rivian, they've got it. They're putting in their own charging networks. So those have been very successful. So when you talk to people, if they have a Tesla, they don't see this backlash. They can charge at home. They can charge on the road. They really have no problems. But when you have a BMW or a Chevy Volt or Bolt and you want to charge on the road, it's much harder to find those stations. And that became more, I would say it's always been an issue, but it became more apparent over the summer last year when politicians were traveling in their electric cars. And all of a sudden they're like, I can't charge. This one's broken. And honestly, it's not the fact that they're rolling it out too quickly, but it's that it can't be rolled out as quickly as it needs to be rolled out unless you take it into private, like Tesla and Rivian. So I think that's some of where your backlash is coming from.
Mm.
False information floating around social media about lithium mining and things like that, and where do the batteries go when the car dies? Well, they're not sitting in a junkyard like your gas car, right? And they're
Yeah.
not being pulled and left there to rot, to rust, all of that. So the batteries go into second use, they go into programs, they go into battery storage for companies who can charge the batteries, whereas they can use that power later for emergencies or blackout. So the batteries do have second and third lives with them, which your car doesn't necessarily, your gas car doesn't necessarily have. So that's kind of what I see as one of the biggest issues with the backlash is it's changing the mindset, being able to charge at home, and then not worrying about where you're going to go on the road when you make a trip. That charging needs to be available. So there's the kind of the two things I see.
Yeah.
And on the commercial side, I think it's very similar, or is kind of following a similar path. Definitely on the infrastructure side of things. Commercial EV is still lagging behind, I think, consumer EVs, right, which have been in the market now for 10 years. There's greater level of adoption at the consumer level than there is on the commercial level. But yeah, infrastructure or lack thereof for charging is definitely a problem, which is why we see again on the commercial side. Most of the early success that we've seen has been with kind of what they call last mile, right? It's the Amazons of the world, it's the FedExes of the world, where their vans may run 100 miles or 150 miles or 200 miles a day, but they can come back to their facility every day, and charge, as opposed to kind of the over the road trucks that semi trucks that we're all familiar with. While we are starting to see some penetration in that market, it's still very slow because the infrastructure's not there.
Yeah. And some other data points that are kind of like a counterweight to like the backlash or the perceived backlash against EVs. Q4 2023 EV sales were up 40% from the year prior, and it was topped 1 million EVs sold in the US for the first time. And Blink Charging, I just came across this. They announced a record fourth quarter with 89% revenue growth and 130% increase in full year 2023 revenues, up to 140 million. So while there is a lot of doom and gloom type of things being said about the EV industry, is still quite buoyant, and people are buying EV cars, and EV charging infrastructure is still getting rolled out.
Mm-hmm.
So with that, and kind of in this similar vein, but going down into a bit more specific, what do you guys think are the biggest challenges facing EV charging for consumer, residential, and fleet?
Yeah, I think with the consumer / residential, you can kind of lot fleet into that a little bit based on a take-home fleet. But consumer and residential, the biggest issue is, can they charge at home? Like I was saying, if you live in a multi-unit dwelling or a MUD, and maybe it's a condo or apartment complex, and you want to have your EV charging, it's not as straightforward as installing a station in your garage that you control and charging. So you have to jump through some hoops. But with the smarter charging stations that can collect data, that can do time of use, and give reports on how much charging has happened, how many kilowatt hours have been used. For those customers with the bigger challenge, you can send that information to your HOA and to your apartment complex, and they can bill you appropriately for the energy you've used. So it's not like the whole building is paying for someone else to charge their car. Fleet is the same way. I think you're starting to see more take-home fleets, cable companies, pharmacy and biogenetic companies. They're starting to do take-home fleets more. So they all doing the same thing. They're putting a charging station in the driver's home with the vehicle, and they're collecting that information. So in some cases, it's set up where the company controls that charging, on how much they can do, and then they reimburse the driver, so the driver is not having to pay for that out of their own home energy bill. So it's also, again, a challenge because, like I said, there's not a lot of understanding and education around how those can work for you in a good way. People immediately go to the downside because that's how we are as people. We just go, well, yeah, it's great, but what's in it for me, or how's it going to hurt me? So once you have that understanding that all of that can be data tracked, and it's really kind of seamless once you get it going, that it does work for everybody. So biggest challenges are the education around, again, the charging and what can be gained from that.
Yeah, pretty, again, similar on the commercial side. It's infrastructure. It's really, it all boils down to infrastructure, which is why, like I said, you see, kind of the last mile fleets, that are doing well. You see a lot of focus on delivery of those type of vehicles, right? Whether it's Rivian, who I believe supports the Amazon. Bright Drop does FedEx, the electric FedEx trucks. You have another company called Gatic, which does, kind of, again, the small delivery van or, small type of trucks that are out there. When you're able to bring that vehicle back to, a common location every night and plug it in, and have somebody managing that infrastructure there, it works well. But when you're trying to maybe take your truck across country, it's very hit or miss, right? Because, there aren't the Tesla superchargers necessarily for trucks all across the nation, right? We have some in California because that's where Tesla's based. But yeah, it gets pretty sketchy beyond that.
All right, so let's delve a little bit more into customer experience. So can you tell us about in the past and how you came to define the problem and what steps you took to solve that problem? Chris, you want to go first?
Yeah, I know we talked about one. We talked about a couple of them, but one in particular, it was really kind of one of those moments when you get done and you're just like, wow, what did we just do? I had a customer call in. He was up in the Washington, Seattle area. His I can't remember if it was his office or his workshop was on like an island, literally in the middle of the sound. And he drove his electric car there. He went to plug into our station and it didn't charge while he was there. And he needed that charge to get off the island, literally needed the charge. And there wasn't anywhere he could go. There was nothing much he could do. So short of taking the cable that came with the car, which at that time they were only giving out 110-volt charging stations that would, only charge at 1.5 kilowatts per hour. I started talking with him, and I had already talked with one of our engineers because he had said that this problem could come up, but he wasn't really sure. It was going to be very outside the wire on where this problem could happen. So I started talking to this customer and I said, I know this is going to sound crazy, but I need you to do me a favor. I need you to unplug the juice box and open the cover and tell me what circuit board you have on there. Because at that time, we didn't have stickers or anything on the outside of the box that said what it was. So he reads this, I don't remember the number, but it was like 8.12.14 Rev 2 or something like that. And I said, oh, wow, this could be the unicorn box, right? So I said, my engineer said that when they did this PCB, this redesign, there was a resistor on there that really didn't need to be there, but the spec called for it, so they put it in, and it really didn't have a function other than the function was covered by something else on the board. So if it didn't work, it should still cover whatever function it's supposed to do. So I said, what they told me was if you have wire cutters or finger cuticle nippers or something, if you can take that while this box is unplugged, just cut the end of the resistor and lift it away from the board, and then plug it back in and see if it charges your car. And he's like, I'm willing to do this because otherwise I'm stuck overnight here. So he did it. He plugged it in and his car charged. And we were both like, oh, whoa. So I immediately went back to the engineer and I'm like, oh my gosh, this really worked. And he said, yeah, there weren't too many of them out there, but it was one of those rare cases where I had enough information to be dangerous and know that this could be the issue. And then when we realized that was the issue, because other times when it happened, I'm like, does it have this board? And they're like, no. And I'm like, okay, sorry, we're going to have to replace the box. But this one actually worked. And it was the right person in the right situation where it really was like that. aha moment of we just solved like all the world's problems right there with that one little thing. It was that kind of feeling. So that was probably the most cool resolution I ever had with a customer over the phone.
Yeah, yeah, and so gratifying to be able to help that person in need. During the early pioneering days of EV charging,
it was the wild, wild west. I mean, it was, it was out there. I kind of had that, do what needed to be done to fix something. And if it was crazy, it was crazy. But at the same time, we were also trying to figure out how to build a better product and not have those issues, going forward. And, when cars would charge and they'd call me and they'd go, my car didn't charge last night, but my Fiat has these, what they called them, goalposts in the dash. It's because the car never woke up to take a charge. So our engineers would go rent those cars and try and see what the problem was, and figured out it was the pilot signal. Once the car went to sleep, when the juice box turned over, the car wouldn't charge. So they created a pilot signal break on the circuit board to reproduce that. So then the cars would wake up, take a charge, and everything was good. But it took, a lot of trying to figure out what was going on, and we didn't have a lot of restrictions back then like you do now. So that was kind of good, but in a good way. When you're an entrepreneurial company and you're improvising new technology and new product, you're going to have some of that. So it was just whatever it took.
What a story. Apollo 13 meets MacGyver meets EV charging stations. That's awesome.
Thank God he wasn't up in space, but yeah. Yeah.
Cool. Rod, any stories?
I can't match that. That was that was a great MacGyver story. I mean, literally with cuticle clippers. I mean, that's MacGyver at its best.
Moving forward with customer experience, what advice do you have for e-mobility companies in the space when it comes to being strategic about customer experience? Are there any best practices that you want to share?
Yes, you're selling a product. Yes, you have something you're supporting, but understand your customer. What makes them, why are they calling you? What is their problem? What are they expecting? Once you can do that, and you don't have to be an EV driver to do that. You can be an empathetic customer service agent and trying to understand what's going on. But you need to understand your customer, be empathetic with what's going on with them, and find the best solution for them without breaking the bank with you and your company. So, it's not like, oh, you refund everybody that has a problem or you give out a bunch of gift cards. But, if they have to go and charge at a public station because their charger didn't work at home overnight, you might want to reimburse them. But in general, even away from EVs, understand your customer and empathize with them, because the last thing you want is someone to answer the phone and be very cold, very mechanical. And you have to add a little bit of personality in there, because otherwise they might as well be talking to a bot. And in general, people don't like to talk to bots because there's no feedback. There's no adjustment. It's all whatever is there is there. So in some ways, you can get that with different ways, but understand what your customer needs and be empathetic with them.
I'd say on the commercial side, probably the biggest one is just it's the ramp up, right? You need to assume that or understand that a lot of your customers don't have a lot of experience with EVs, right? A lot of these commercial fleets, it's a new thing, right? And a diesel mechanic, suddenly having, been thrust to manage EVs, and having to deal with challenges around charging, it's going to be a big ramp for them, right? So you need to take that in mind, and kind of from a service perspective, right? And immediately jumping in and assuming that they're going to, have a good understanding of, the infrastructure, the way it works, and in common pitfalls, right? So you really kind of have to make sure that you're really guiding them through the process, because if you jump in right away and, you're over their head, or you're not, being able to kind of walk them through the process, it's just going to lead to frustration, and ultimately that's going to hamper, the adoption and the deployment of this technology, right? So, just understand that these people may need a little bit of handholding, or a little bit more than, normal, especially at the beginning, as they kind of start to deploy this technology and start to get it up to speed.
You're right. And to that point, we had a lot of customers who were older who were getting Chevy Volts because they thought that was a great thing, and they were getting rebates from their electric company, but they didn't have a smartphone. So it makes it very difficult, and you have to find someone. I'm like, do you have grandkids? Do you have a neighbor who has a teenager? And sometimes that's the lengths we would go to get people connected and get them. But you're right, they don't. It's still a new technology to a lot of people. It's not as mainstream as people want to make it out to be.
Yeah, it was interesting being in the truck tech space and talking with a lot of fleet customers. Again, a lot of these fleet customers have been around for a long time, some of them up to 100 years. And, they're very entrenched in what they do. And when you're trying to introduce new technology, they're not always the most forward thinking, right? So it takes a little bit of kind of pulling to kind of get them into it and understanding the benefits, but also understanding how do I navigate the challenges that are going to be inherent with really trying to adopt any new technology. So it's an interesting space and an interesting time.
Yeah.
Question for you, Chris. I'm curious as to what happened in like Chicago with that huge Tesla charging, cold weather. Can you explain like what happened there?
Yeah, without being snarky, to be fair, people would rent the car and then put it out in cold weather, not knowing how to use the car, and then complain about it not charging. That was one of the big things that came out of that. But it's a fact. It will happen. The thing is, every EV I have driven has had preconditioning, and the only EV I know of that doesn't have any thermal management, heating or cooling for their batteries at the time, was Leaf, the Nissan Leaf. So any of those vehicles, when you're plugged in and charging, would precondition the battery, because it's not good for the battery to charge it when it's too cold or when it's too warm. So the cars have that built in already. So people that were talking about their cars not starting were just like gas cars not starting. They're sitting out in the cold and they're not going to charge because there's nothing warming them up. The EV actually has an advantage over that gas car, where it has that ability to precondition the batteries and warm them up or cool them off. So a lot of it was hype over lack of education on how the cars worked, and social media people going out there trying to drive the narrative that EVs are bad. Part of that going back to the beginning with the negative with the dark and the light, the slide that you had, the backlash. People were trying to add to that backlash of EVs, when in reality there's ways that it can be prevented. My car in particular, I have it set to precondition every morning, whether I'm taking the car or not. It doesn't hurt the car. It might use 1 or 2 extra kilowatts of electricity, but that battery is at optimal temperature when I go to leave, whether it's summer or winter. And when you have that, your car starts. Your inside can be warmed. That's a separate function, but you can also warm the inside of the car. And your range is at its optimal, because then your battery is at its peak or optimal conditions for driving. So again, it's a lot of that was hype over non-educated drivers and others trying to drive that negative narrative.
Switching gears slightly here, AI. We can't go anywhere in this world these days without AI, ChatGPT, OpenAI, and generative AIs. Let's talk AI. What are your thoughts on the impact and disruption that it'll have in eMobility?
Yeah, if anyone had read the article, I was the first person in the eMobility industry to use AI with Minerva. When our CEO came to me and said, "What do you think of this? It's new technology. Can it help us?" My first thought was, oh my gosh, it would shorten my training time with new agents. It would bring information to them faster, shortening my call times. I would be collecting more data. I would know where they're calling from. I would know what they're driving. I would know if they're happy or not happy. I mean, I had all of this running through my mind, how great this could be. And it took a little bit to implement it, because it is pulling data from our many years of support tickets and calls and things. But it was nice, because with our agents, they had it right in front of them now. When someone would call and say, "I ordered yesterday, what's my shipping?" Instead of having to go to a separate program and look at our web store to find out what the shipping was, it would pop up right in front of them, and it would bring it to their attention right on the screen. So it did shorten our call times. And I think AI has always been around for a very long time. People just don't realize it's been around for so long, just in different ways. But the AI with the customers and the agent assist was really, I think it's going to be, even going forward, more groundbreaking for customer service, because you still have that personal touch. It's not a bot talking to them, but they're getting information based on what they've already told other customers. And then that information is easier to get to them and it's faster. And the new agents, it pops up for them right away. So they may not know the answer, but we've already given it to many customers. So it pops up in front of that agent and they don't have to struggle going, I don't know, let me transfer you to someone else. And the last thing the customer wants to hear is, I don't want to be transferred and have to tell my story for 4 times every time you transfer me. So again, I think the AI is a great thing. And like I said, with the data, you know, a lot of the calls I took early on when I was the one answering the phones were from companies that we ended up working with later, because they said, hey, we saw you're doing this thing with charging, and we want to be on board. Can you do it with our stations? So we ended up working with AeroVironment and Clipper Creek, putting our data, our JuiceNet onto those boxes. So those customers could also have the data and the programming and everything we did. So, you know, it's just a matter of what's out there and who you talk to. But in general, I think AI is going to be more than helpful if it's used properly. And like I said, it collects people who want to buy things from you. Sales, you can send leads to sales, because not all of those get picked up. And again, you have all that customer information and all the product information right in front of you. So for us, it worked really well.
Oh, that's great to hear. Thanks, Chris. Yeah. Rod, any thoughts on AI?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I'm a little bit biased because I've been working with you, Daniel, and the team there at Minerva. But just like Chris said, I mean, I see a lot of value to this, both in getting answers quicker for customers, right? When they call in, kind of reducing, what we used to call the average handle time for a particular interaction, because, the AI is helping guide things, right? It's helping that agent get the information they need a lot quicker to answer the customer's question. And again, just like Chris said, it's learning, right? It's understanding that, hey, there's a pattern, and, I'm going to be able to potentially better answer those questions, as they come in. Because I think on the EV space, especially when we look at EV charging, whether it's residential or consumer, by and large, a lot of the questions are probably going to be similar. Hey, I can't get this thing to work, right? I plugged it in and it's not working, or I plugged it in and it stopped charging after 15 minutes and I'm only at, 50%. What's going on, right? It's going to be a lot of the same challenges, whether it's, plugging into your Mach-E or your Tesla, or you're plugging into your delivery van or your Class 8 semi-truck. And again, I see a lot of value in this technology and being able to help answer things quicker, and also, again, get those agents up to speed quicker, leveraging the AI. So yeah, I'm a big fan of what's going on in the space.
Yeah, I was going to say too, as a manager running a team, it was super helpful because I could see what agents were saying. I had a complete transcript of everything. So I could see if they were giving the right information, if they were giving the wrong information. If they were giving wrong information, it was, well, is that in our database somewhere? Did we have bad information at one time that it picked up on? And we were really good with Daniel and the team to go in and go, you know what, this isn't right, we need to change this. And we could scrub that from the AI. So that was really helpful too. And certain words were translated incorrectly into really bad words. So we would, say, nope, we need to remove these and make sure that someone says this, those words aren't put in the transcript. But that transcript gave me the ability to go through and go, it says right here, I see what the transcript told you, and you said something different. So why was that? And it would give me an idea of where I needed to improve with the team as well. So there's a lot of good things it can be used for on both sides, in my opinion.
Yeah, and AI is never really just out of the box. There's always some fine tuning that needs to happen with the language and the words and the entity extraction. So, right, thanks for pointing that out. This is a fun question. 5 years from now, so where do you think we're going to be in the EV and the EV charging space?
5 years. I struggle with this only a little bit because we're only 10 years into a whole world of EVs, and even AI is, like I said, it's been around a long time, but in this space where I've been using it, I've only been using it for a couple of years. And if the growth goes the way it's been going in 5 years, we would have, I'd say, probably a lot more adoption of EVs. We'd have a
Mhm.
lot more public charging out there. We'd have a lot more take-home fleets. Um, and that's if it keeps going in the way it's been going. With this last hit we've taken, with the bad press and the negative um, stuff coming out, like you said, the cold weather and the batteries and all that. I don't know if it'll grow that fast, but in 5 years, I know we're going to be a lot further than we are now. It's just a matter of how much further is hard to gauge.
Hey, and Chris, in terms of the charging times,
Hmm.
today we have some pretty quick charging stations. Like 5 years from now, will
Hmm.
that technology change where it'll be even faster?
It's it, I don't know that it could be much faster. You can only charge a battery at so much with so
Hmm.
much energy without killing it over time, because the faster you charge, the more heat you generate, the more you have to dissipate somewhere, the more damage you could do to those batteries. Right now, I think Porsche, and I forget, I haven't been up on all of that lately, but I know a lot of the brands now are going to the much faster charging rates. DC fast charging, so you have to understand too, DC fast charging when you're in public versus your home charger, which is a level 2, AC DC. DC goes straight to the car's battery. It doesn't go through the onboard charger because it doesn't have to be converted. Your battery stores and charges in DC. So that going straight to the battery can inherently do more damage if it's not protected with, like I said, temperatures and ramping and all of that. So I don't know that you could go much faster than you are now without damaging the vehicles. If you went to a much larger battery, then you could get more range with a faster charge, but still having some of that battery open at the top end, and you wouldn't be doing the damage. You'd have room for degradation at that point. But do people want to spend that kind of money on a bigger battery pack just for that reason? And as cells get smaller, how much smaller that can they get? I mean, I've seen some now the size of a small pocket flashlight. Those are what a lot of the cells are in the original Rivians. They're the size of a pocket flashlight, and they're just a bunch put onto the base of the truck. How much smaller can you go to get more power out of your battery? So I don't know that you can go much faster, but there are faster chargers out there now that are probably in the sweet spot. My car, I just drove to Phoenix, 312 miles one way. I stopped in the middle, and we hit 147 kilowatt hour rate, but then it started tapering down right away. The car is protecting the battery at that point. It's not going to keep you at that high rate. So
Mm.
I don't think you're ever going to find instant charging or super fast. That's just the nature of the batteries and when you're charging them. But I think we will have more cars at the higher charge rate than just the three or four that you see there now. I think that will grow. But the three or four brands that have it now are probably getting close to topping out, in my opinion, without either going to a much larger battery or a different technology.
Rod, you have anything to add on 5 years
Yeah,
from
I
now?
think I think in 5 years it's going to be, dramatically different on the commercial side. There's a lot of stuff that's going on there that I think will speed adoption of this technology. I mean, you had the federal infrastructure bill, and I think it's the Inflation Reduction Act or something like that, where they were going to spec out what they call electric corridors around the
Mhm.
country, right? Where they were going to build out the infrastructure within these corridors or commercial vehicles using EV technology that I think will really help speed up the adoption of this. I've seen a lot of interesting things. I mean, EV as a service, right? Where they're providing electric fleets and mobility as a service to commercial carriers, electric truck sharing. You have folks like Mitsubishi, who's kind of starting to do some investigation on EV battery financing, because that's going to be probably the biggest expense as we look at these commercial vehicles that are on the road every day, doing hundreds of miles every day. How long the batteries last, and how quickly they can get them changed. Obviously, if you're able to do some financing, some tricky financing there, that will definitely help dealers, right? That's going to play a bigger role. They're looking at dealers providing charging infrastructure, where you can, bring your truck to your local dealer, right? Whether it's PACCAR, who, Peterbilt, Kenworth dealers, Volvo Mack dealers, things like that, where the carriers can just kind of have their vehicles charged at the dealer, because they have the infrastructure built out there. So again, there's a lot of stuff I think that's going to be going on. that's going to help the adoption. I mean, because they have some pretty lofty expectations in terms of where this is going to go on the commercial side. I think it was a report by Interact Analysis who said that they're expecting, I think it's by 2030, the global forecast for EVs, battery electric vehicles on the commercial side is supposed to hit around 43%. So it's supposed to, they're expecting it to ramp up as the technology and the infrastructure really starts to come into play for these vehicles. So it'll be really exciting over the next 5 years to see where this plays out on the commercial side, right? It's not just Tesla. You have all the old major manufacturers that are starting to play in this space and starting to offer EV powered trucks. So it's really cool to kind of see it take hold.
So any advice, crawl, walk, run approach to making customer experience successful in eMobility? I know we touched on some like insights and best practices, but if you were kind of stage a crawl, walk, run, how would that look?
Listen, I can't stress that enough. When someone calls in, the people that don't listen to you on the other end of the line is crazy. Listen, learn from the customer and empathize with them, and that's going to get you 90% of your customers solved. I think customer experience though versus customer service expands on that, and it's the whole approach to the customer, right? It's not just after you sell them and they go on their own and you leave them alone, but I think that customer needs to be, I don't want to say bothered, because you don't want to be bothered, right? You buy something from someone and they keep bugging you. That's not what we're looking at. But I think in some ways the customer experience expands to the whole company. So it starts with sales, it starts with shipping, it starts with support, and maybe some follow-up from that. It's not just relying on your customer service team for customer experience, it's the whole company. And once the whole company comes on board, to think about that with their customers from the beginning, when they're initially meeting with them and asking them to buy something, to after they're sold, and whether it's a program manager, a project manager, however that process works out until it gets to the customer service, that whole company needs to be involved with the customer. And to me, that would be your crawl, walk, run approach, because the customer experience has to be over encompassing with the entire company, not just the end customer service team.
Yeah, and I would say, and again, I kind of alluded to this on a previous question. On the commercial side, don't overlook the crawling, right? You're going to have varying levels of experience and capabilities and acceptance of this technology when you're working with commercial customers. So, you may have some that are very eager and well versed in it and or hitting the ground running, right? But you're going to have a lot of customers that this is very new to them, and don't underestimate the need to kind of maybe be basic and walk people through certain things that you would assume that they would already know, because this is new technology for a lot of people, right? So it's going to take a while for people to kind of understand it and ramp it and understand how to use it and really leverage it to its maximum capabilities.
You're right. Education.
Yeah, education.
And that's the big one. I missed that, but yeah, it's true. You have, like I was talking about with the older customers that would purchase the charging station on smartphones. Part of that was not just helping them; it was educating them in how it all worked. And people will tend to do more with what they understand, with what they don't understand. So once we educate them, like you said, they are more willing to do more than if they don't understand the technology or how it's going to work for them.
Any last thoughts that you want to share with the audience?
It's still a fairly new industry in its infancy. It's only, electric vehicles. Yes, the first electric vehicle was built like 100 years ago, but it didn't really go anywhere because there was no infrastructure for it. So, when you look now at everything that came out, you have to keep in mind that it wasn't just it rolled out and everything was great. Tesla kind of came along and really pushed that forward. The Chevy was going to close down the Volt until Tesla came out, because the Volt wasn't selling. And all of a sudden, sales for the Volt took off because people realized they could have, the gas and the electric. And we kind of jokingly called it training wheels in the industry. If you want to have an EV, get a plug-in hybrid. Then you would see what it was like, because you got used to plugging in at night. And once you realized you did most of your driving on electric, it was a much simpler switch. A lot of that came with the education and understanding how the vehicles worked and what they could do. I think the other thing is, like you said, be patient with the industry, because we're not, and I'm speaking as someone on the industry side who, has supported people who buy charging stations. I have a charging station. I have an electric vehicle. Be patient with the industry because we're learning as the customers are learning as well. We're just trying to stay ahead of that. And sometimes we don't know all the answers. Like I said, I'm not normally asking people to cut resistors on a circuit board, but we will try and work through. And if you're patient as a customer moving into an EV, know that there's people out there that want to help you and support you. We're not just going to try and leave you stranded. Of course, it's like, an airplane at an airport when there's weather. There's not much you can do in some cases. And unfortunately, if there's that one, I would say it's probably less than 1% of people who would actually get stranded because of driving an EV. But if it happens, it happens. You have to kind of make do and figure out, do I need to go, rent a car, whatever needs to be done. But those would be very rare cases. And the more we're moving forward, the less you should see that happening. And, there's charging stations spread around at this point that it's going to get even more dense and better, especially just like you said, along the electric corridors and with NEVI coming out and the stations being built out. The other thing too is Tesla just opened their charging protocols to all of the other electric vehicle companies. And for me, as one of my biggest thoughts rolling around my head is that is going to advance us even much more than I was even thinking of the 5-year plan, because Tesla has the superchargers out there. Where I stopped in Dateland, there were 4 CCS combo chargers where I was for my car. There were 50 Tesla superchargers 100 feet away, and only 10 were being used. So once that opens up, it's going to expand quickly. And as long as industry and infrastructure can keep up with that, it will grow rapidly. And I think you're going to see a little bit of a slow climb, and then it's going to take off. So be patient, educate, and understand, what you're getting into, and that people do want to help you, I think is the biggest thing.